plus Moderation. Ne? Ladies and gentlemen, as we are about to carry on, please do take your seats. Please take your seats for the next session. Thank you.
Welcome to this session here at the Berlin Global Dialogue on smart regulation. Bill and myself, on different trips, have just come back straight from the US, where there is talk of no regulation. So this should be an interesting panel, and I'm very pleased to welcome those people who can change it, who shape the Europe we live in, and who shape this regulation in Germany and the European Union. Valdis Dombrovskis, the EU Commissioner for the Economy and Productivity, is also in your title, and Katherina Reiche, the German Trade Minister. And Bill Anderson, the CEO of Bayer. Great to have you back here for your unique perspective, because you run a company that has unique challenges, but you also have a unique perspective. And this is interesting. It's not a fire alarm, so I would like to start asking you, Commissioner, because you got a letter, didn't you, from 19 European states ahead of that EU summit that is taking place. In fact, we are sitting here at this table as EU leaders are meeting to discuss exactly the deregulation that everybody's been talking about. And there's a new tone in the letter of these leaders, isn't there, asking for very fast action. What do you make of that?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this invitation. On the simplification agenda, maybe to put it in a broader context first. So when we started this European Commission's mandate, we put two overarching priorities for this mandate. One is to strengthen competitiveness of European economy, and another is security and defense. And obviously, this simplification, reduction of administrative burden belongs to this work stream on improving the competitiveness. And if anything, the recent developments shows that indeed there is probably even more urgency to act than once we were starting. Therefore, I would say we welcome that member states are engaged and willing to move ahead with the simplification agenda, which is very important, because one thing is what European Commission puts forward as a proposals, another thing is what comes out of the legislative process, because only what comes out of the legislative process, including the support of member states, is what citizens and businesses feel on the ground. Indeed, this letter calls, so to say, for a steady flow of those simplification omnibus proposals. And we had been for a strong start. So since the beginning of this year, we already put forward 6 simplification omnibus proposals, some other simplification proposals, all in all yielding 8.6 billion euros in savings of administrative costs. Here we are talking about annual recurring administrative costs. But we set our overall aim at 37.5 billion euros burden reduction, meaning 25% burden reduction for all companies and 35% for SMEs. And to arrive at this goal, if you just look at the figures, 8.6 billion and 37.5, indeed, we need to continue with at least the same pace also for the coming years. So I think it's very rightly so what member states are asking the Commission to do. And from Commission side, we are willing to move forward. But it's equally important, if not more important, that also the legislative process moves swiftly and those omnibus proposals are actually adopted by co-legislators.
And of course, you need the member states to want to move forward with any kind of deregulation and any kind of changes to regulation. Minister Reiche, I would like to ask you, because it's only fairly recently that you actually made the transition from actually the corporate side into politics, and now you're trade minister of a country that has a bit of a reputation for gold plating a lot of regulations that come out of Brussels, adding another touch, another set of regulations. What is your approach? And first of all, what is your impression? What was the biggest shock experience that you had in this transition?
Well, the biggest shock was to come from a more or less digitized workflow.
Oh, we'll get to that, yes.
Back to, I don't know, paperwork. But to answer your question, Germany finds itself in a very challenging economic situation. After 2 years of decline, we will probably see a kind of a base. We reached right now 0.2 of GDP growth, might be in the end of the year, but that's basically nothing compared to an economy like Germany. There are many reasons for this, but red tape is definitely one of this. Eurostat estimates that the total burden of bureaucracy on European businesses sums up to say, look here, 150 billion euros. In Germany alone, 65 billion euros, which is 1.5% of the GDP. And that is obviously too much.
I just want to add that the IMF...
In the last 2 years, 225,000 new jobs were created just by companies, just to cope with additional bureaucratic reports and burdens. So, no jobs for new cars, no jobs for new chemicals, no jobs for AI, just to cope with required bureaucracy. And that is something we really have to get changed. Otherwise, we won't have the pace of change. We won't come back to competitiveness, which the continent needs and also Germany needs to be back on track and to win again.
And I just wanted to add that the IMF figure it puts on all of these regulations, inner regulations, amounts, according to the IMF, to a 44% tariff inside the European Union, which of course is a shocking figure.
44% for goods and even 110% for digitized or services. 110%, so to be bluntly, to negotiate with our American friends about tariffs is one thing. To reduce it, the fictional tariffs within the EU, we should do our own homework.
So can't blame it all on Trump. Bill, you come from the receiving end of this regulation. What to you is the most urgent question that you may or may not have put into a letter to political leaders before?
I actually think we sort of have to reverse the question. And frankly, I know it's really popular to pick on politicians. I really try to avoid that because I find in a democratic society, the politicians are essentially trying to do their best to give the people what they've asked for. And in a sense, I think we have to think about that a little. If we have a bureaucratic state in Europe, it somehow is reflecting the choices that people are making. And I know, people say, well, I don't want to be bureaucratic. What do you mean? I had a recent conversation about just one thing we're trying to do at the company right now. We're trying to expand a facility on land we already own in a town where we've been doing business for over, 90 years. And that project's being blocked by local members of the town council because essentially they don't want the construction noise and traffic. And they say, well, when the project's completed, there would also be more traffic. And do you know, are you kidding? We have a sort of an economic crisis. We already own the land. It's zoned already. We're following all the rules. It's being blocked just because someone's saying, well, we don't want that in our neighborhood. We don't want basically more business. This is an industrial zone, right? So that's what I'd love to blame that politician, but that politician is doing what their constituents apparently want them to do. So I just think we have to go a little deeper on this and say, hey, do we want to have a prosperous continent with new opportunities for young people, or do we want to be kind of trapped in this fear of progress? So I think smart regulation, the name of the panel, I think what smart regulation means is, how do we accelerate progress for people, for the economy, for business in Europe? And one example right now that's being discussed is new gene editing, right? This is an opportunity for Europe to stay apace with possibilities in agriculture, for new seeds that confer drought resistance or ability to create their own nutrients by pulling nitrogen out of the air into the soil. And this is an opportunity. It's before the European Parliament right now. This is the positive kind of steps that European people and politicians need to get behind.
I think you're putting a spotlight on a bit of a chicken-egg situation. What was there first, the policies or the reaction of the people? And I feel we're just a short step away from blaming the media about this. But when you mention those specific issues, like gene editing, for instance, they go to also the very fundamentals of the European Union. And I'd like to take that back to you, Commissioner. Can you just map out what your daily struggle is between the not just the individual regulations, but the fundamentals of the European Union, how it works, and that blatant need to get rid of regulation and unleash European growth, because it is badly needed, not just economically, but also for Europe's standing in the world, because soft power isn't doing the trick at the moment, is it?
Well, indeed, we are now in a more fragmented, more conflictual world, and Europe needs to find its space in this more conflictual world. Obviously, lots of those things are related with security and defense, where Europe also needs to become a hard power, and this is indeed now a strong priority. But also to be strong on security, we need to have a strong economic basis, which brings us back to our competitiveness agenda. As I said, it's basically recognized that we need to act fast. That's why one of the first initiatives of this European Commission was so-called competitiveness compass, where we actually outlined main elements which we need to deal with to improve competitiveness of European economy. And it has many things, including addressing the innovation gap, where we are just spending less on research and innovations than other large economies, addressing relatively high energy prices, dealing with barriers to the single market, as it was already mentioned. But also obviously dealing with administrative burdens and bureaucracy. So I think this willingness to move forward, the sense of urgency is there, and from Commission side we are willing to move forward. We are willing to listen to businesses, to stakeholders, also practically, where are the barriers, where are some kind of inconsistencies, overlaps, and so on and so forth, so that we can remove. So we do it also very much in consultation with businesses. But also, as I said, it's important that all those changes pass the legislative process. And there, frankly, one could expect for a somewhat, faster pace in processing those simplification proposals by co-legislators, and where we also see, I would say, a certain ideological divide on the approach to simplification, with different political groups, notably in European Parliament, having quite different views on the need and urgency of this simplification work.
Minister Reiche, energy security, of course, is a huge issue for Germany, for Europe as a whole. When we're talking about the political process needed to enable maybe a joint energy market in the EU, what are the key stumbling blocks for you, and what about the process do you feel needs fixing?
On European side or on German side?
European side.
On European level. First of all, as Bill Anderson said, it's always good to have somebody to blame that keeps you away from doing your homework. Mm-hmm. And that's why maybe I don't ask the Commissioner for moving faster, more courageous, but maybe analyzing the situation here. The labor productivity. for the last 10 years. In Germany has a gain by 22%, the United States by 42%. 85% of investments in R&D in the United States were put into high tech, a lot of AI. 1/3 of the actual GDP growth of the United States drives from computation. In Germany, we have the situation, we do a lot of investments in mid-cap or mid-tech. We don't allow advanced technologies to grow because that might be analysis. An aging society tends to get risk averse because a tendency to keep what I have kind of overwhelm the look on the necessity to go beyond. And that is something what we have to change. Regulation has to embrace the chances first and then to cope with the risks. New techniques, new technologies always have risks. It's clear. There's no chance without risks. But the tendency first to tackle all mindful thinking of any possible risks prevents you from paving to future and first investing in the chances. That is for energy, that is for biotech, that is for AI. When it comes to energy security, of course, it was not wise to stick for more than 55% on one deliverer of gas. But also, to be honest, it was a large coalition of political parties and German companies who were happy to have affordable energy imports. That we lost, and energy prices are here ×3, ×4, and due to now our dependency on LNG, there isn't a very short term on reducing those import costs. So first thing has to be diversification of import sources. Yes, the United States, but also Middle East, also in Europe, and using our own resources. Also tendency we have to stop. If we have own resources on gas or also on rare earths or earth's metals, we should start to produce our own. We still have gas reserves. We should start to develop them or reinforce them. If we have lithium, if we have other metals, we should start to invest, knowing that the now dependencies is a 10 or 15 years track to cope with China. Nevertheless, if you don't start, you never will have a chance to follow. So that is maybe a complex answer or maybe a simple question, but gives an idea how I think.
I would have a question about how German government is structured. Did you find, coming into a ministry, that you employ more people who are looking for opportunities or who are exploring risks?
Well, what I did is to restructure the ministry. So we presented a new org chart. It's public, and we did some changes, yes. First of all, defense industry is an industry and is a growth factor. It wasn't seen, it is for the last 20, maybe even more years, because during the Cold War and also post-Cold War phase, we allowed ourselves not to focus on defense, on security. Second, we will strengthen the ministry when it comes to understand capital market. No public funding will be enough for the investments we need. So maybe 1/10 of the investments will be covered by public spending. 90% have to come from businesses. That's why we have to attract international capital market. Yes, the capital union is something we rely on decisions on the EU, but we have also to open. If we have large investments on energy infrastructure, it's not necessary to have a political idea. It's necessary to understand how an investment fund found it attractive and invest in an infrastructure, in a grid, in an LNG terminal. So we strengthen ourselves here, and we go back on future technologies. We will look also into technologies which are not accepted right now or don't have a political majority. But when it comes to nuclear or biotech, we have to know where the future is going and have to understand techniques, we have to understand regulation, and we have to shape norms and norms. Otherwise, you're out of the race.
Bill, BioNTech was just mentioned. I would like to take that to you. What lessons should European leaders draw from the fact that BioNTech in the end listed in the United States?
Well, I'm not sure that the listing location is so important. I do think what is important is, do we have the conditions that provide for innovation? And on that, I mean, I think government can do a lot to create, simple rules and a more welcoming environment. But I also think there's a lot companies need to do on that. I find that, how would I say, people in business, we love to point to the government as being, very bureaucratic. But the reality is that large global companies tend to be very bureaucratic. And in fact, if new new rules, the Verordnungen, are the instrument of bureaucracy, bureaucratic strangulation in government. In companies, it's PowerPoint, right? Basically people go to meetings to talk about the PowerPoint slides that they need to make to get things approved by the next 3 layers above them, and then they spend time talking about, like, when's the next meeting where we review the next version of the PowerPoint slides. That's bureaucracy. Because what is bureaucracy, by the way? Nobody gets up in the morning and says, hey, I'm going to go be bureaucratic today. All right?
Not so sure, but yeah.
Well, I tend to think there's very few people who do that. But what we do is we unintentionally create things that just slow everybody down, prevent progress. And so, for example, what we've done at Bayer, we've taken out not quite half the layers, but 5 layers of the organization. We have managers now who are managing 20, 50, even 100 people, okay, reporting to one manager. And by the way, usually people would think about, oh, is that cost savings? No, it's not about cost savings. It's about basically putting the decision-making power with the people that are doing the work, which dramatically increases the speed of everything. And so frankly, I think there's a lot that business can do. So I think government needs to do their job, which is simplifying things, which is providing the basic essentials for common order. And then businesses need to do their part to get faster, to innovate. But I do believe, I just want to say this, yeah, Mr. Reiche, Commissioner Dombrovskis, I think what you guys have said, I really embrace. People point to Brussels a lot, not realizing that, hey, it's the EU legislator that has to move on these things. I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear about promises of reducing bureaucracy in the EU. But what is the stance of their local EU representative on this topic? And they might be very surprised to find that their representative that comes from a party that is for, let's say, for jobs, is blocking efforts to reduce bureaucracy. So this is some of the stuff that we need to cut through. And I think there's an opportunity here to say this is almost like a COVID moment. In February of 2020, we were breaking the glass. We were pulling the fire alarm and saying, this is an emergency, and radical steps need to be taken. And I think Europe, this may be sneaking up on us, but I think we have a bit of a COVID moment here. We have to say, wow, we've got to support these folks. Our government ministers who are trying to make these changes, we've got to reach out to elected members of the legislature saying, we want action now, not talk, to make sure that they have the mandate to make these kind of simplification steps that are needed.
Well, I want to take those two images and two parallels that you're drawing there to you, Commissioner. First of all, that companies are bureaucracies as well, but companies at the end of the day learn every year whether they're running a profit or not. So do you feel that the European Union, with its regulations, is running a political profit or a loss? And also, where's the difference to that COVID moment in terms of recognition when you speak to various governments in the EU?
Yeah, well, on this profit and loss, being Commissioner for Economy, probably what we are watching, whether European economy is growing, whether prosperity in the EU is growing. In a sense, that's at the end of the day what matters for our work.
And it isn't.
It isn't what?
It isn't growing.
Well, actually, it is growing, maybe at a slower pace than we wanted, but EU economy is growing, and actually it was proving resilient despite series of economic shocks we had been facing recently, starting from COVID. But then there are structural problems in our economy which we need to address. For example, productivity growth in EU is already for 2 decades slower than in United States or China, so in other major economies. So we need to address this productivity growth, because without that we will not be able to move on and to catch with other major economies. And that's exactly where the competitiveness compass, where all our simplification work and all the initiatives are coming in. In a sense of urgency, we already discussed in a first round that indeed this level of sense of urgency a bit varies. And I would say among member states, this, by and large, this understanding is there, and I think the fact that 19 member states just reminded us on the urgency to move forward is a good indication of this, even though it has to be noted it's 19, not 27 member states.
Can you explain that?
Well, I will not now go to discuss, argumentation of each member state which signed or didn't sign this letter. That's something to ask for each of those member states. But by and large, I would say this understanding is there across different political spectrum in the EU. As we discussed also, this understanding varies somewhat, but the point is that we also cannot wait. We already see those structural difficulties in the economy. We also see actually already some divestment happening from the EU to other jurisdictions, and it's not something we want to wait until it becomes apparent for everyone and only then act, because then it may be too late to act. So in a sense, it's right to ring the alarm bell now so that we act now.
One set of regulations that has a lot of companies complaining is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD. You're just conducting your forward planning at the moment. What changes can companies expect? What relief can they expect, particularly also for investors who want to invest in the European Union? Well,
indeed, this Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive indeed is a one where we are hearing lots of complaints and lots of concerns, and that's why it was part of so-called omnibus one, which we put forward already in February. And on a council side, member states have already agreed their position. In the European Parliament side, it was also meant to happen this week. Unfortunately, the vote went another way, so probably we'll have to wait now another month, and there will be another attempt for the European Parliament to set its kind of negotiating mandate for this due diligence directive. In a sense, what the vote which has passed the committee, from my point of view, was a good compromise. Okay, on some occasions it was not going as far in terms of simplification as European Commission's proposal, but I think it was a good basis for discussion, but okay, at this stage we are not quite there yet. But it's worth noting that also part of Omnibus 1 was so-called stop the clock proposal. So we, in a sense, extended the transposition deadlines or for CSDDD and application deadlines so that we have time for this legislative process before those requirements actually kick in. And so there are going to be substantial simplifications if the end of legislative process is, I would say, close to the Commission's original proposal.
I think that gives us an illustration of the complexity. Did you want to respond to that? I would like to use the opportunity because we have a very distinguished audience here, and we also have young leaders in the audience who will be inheriting whatever comes of regulation and deregulation. So I would like to call up one of them, and Desiree Keung has a question. Please introduce yourself, and then I would also take a look around the room after that question, whether anybody here would like to put a question to our panelists. Desiree, where are you? There you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Desiree, I'm from Hong Kong. I'm representing HKUST MBA program, so it's my pleasure to ask the question today. Many points to the Brussels effect where EU regulations become global standard, but then however I see like with the US and also China is offering more agile regulations like for AI and also biotech as well. So how can Europe ensure the regulations, regulatory power doesn't come at a cost of like innovation speed and also its commercialization? So that's my question.
Is there anyone in particular you would like to address this to?
Yeah, I think like I would like be more interested in like Bayer, like CEO of Bayer. You know?
Bill.
Well, I think we can see a pattern that's emerging here, and I think we can learn from this. And the pattern that we see is that in any given new field, China and the U.S. rush forward, and the EU historically has been, at least in the last 10 or 20 years, says, no, we got to regulate it first. So we sort of have to figure out what the rules are before we can actually even start. And that's very difficult because we often don't know, like for example, AI. I mean, there's tremendous speculation about where it's going, but nobody actually knows where it's going. And so what happens is, if the EU has rules and the US and China don't, so then they basically race, the global companies race forward in, let's say, in the US, and then they figure, well, we'll figure out how to adapt to whatever EU rules there are later. That just means that handicaps the EU's ability to progress in those areas. And so 10 years ago, I think we could have thought, oh yeah, hey, this idea of EU is going to sort of lead out with regulation, and that'll create the global standard, and that'll actually, eventually, that'll be an advantage for European companies. I think we can reject that notion at this point. I think we have to say, hey, we have anti-fraud laws already. We have anti-theft laws. We have laws against divulging people's private information. We have those laws in place. So when a new technology comes along like AI, let it go, knowing that those companies are still bound by all those other laws. And then as we start to see what opportunities and problems emerge in the implementation, then we can regulate it. So I do think there's an opportunity to take stock and say, hey, we need a different outlook.
Commissioner, yeah, I'll get to you in a second, because Ursula von der Leyen a couple of years ago said that the EU could export standards. That comment didn't age well, did it, at all?
Indeed, there was this talk on so-called Brussels effect, that in a sense regulations which we are putting out also due to the size of our single market and so on, tended to become global standards, and other jurisdictions would follow, and companies sometimes would just follow this European standard, not to produce according to different standards for different jurisdictions. Unfortunately, indeed, it's kind of fading out, and I think it's another indication that what we are putting out right now is becoming too complex, too bureaucratic, too expensive for companies and other jurisdictions to follow. And if we want, because I think there is a good potential actually for this Brussels effect to be there, but for this Brussels effect to actually be there, we need regulations which are streamlined, which are pragmatic, which are easy to implement, so that both businesses and other jurisdictions actually see advantage in following them. And to get this Brussels effect back, we need to do some homework ourselves in terms of simplification.
Minister Reiche, do you agree with that sequence, that you first work out the regulations and then develop the technology, or would you want to create sandboxes where certain regulations don't apply to enable certain technologies like AI to develop faster?
The latter one, definitely. Some examples. Renewable energies, wind, solar. If we have put the actual regulation on the first windmills, we wouldn't have a single windmill in this country. Why? Because advanced regulation on developing technology or a complex regulation on a non-existing market, just pretend there could be a market, hydrogen, prevents investments, reallocate capital, and also stop companies and private people for being innovative. There are old examples like the good old container done by DIN, so international norm makes sense, it's accepted. Or a regulation done by the EU charging plugs for an electrical car. But then we overdid it. And it's not that bureaucracy is too much, too complex. Often the same regulation target is targeted by different regulation, emissions, taxes, technologies, and that also prohibits further developments, new technologies. I'm with Bill Anderson taking AI. It's not that German companies wouldn't understand how to use AI, maybe for instance in autonomous cars, or our machinery sector. They know how to use AI or chemistry on making processes more efficient, more targeted, for instance, when it comes to molecular research. But then we don't have a proper regulation on EU level. Then we have fragmented markets. And it's obvious that, for instance, AI, the more customers and the more use cases you have, the better is the regulation set up and have good effects. And in Germany, we then make it to the top. Then we have 16 different standards on data privacy in even federal states.
Yeah.
And that is too much, and really we have to work on this. I know every government in the past has said to do so, and it ended up by having more. I think we came to a point, and the Commissioner pointed it out, we are kind of in a dead end, and we have to go the opposite way.
Will you create those exemptions?
Yes, for instance, we have an instrument, we call it Reallabore, real laboratory, where we have in a kind of artificial environment letting investments and technology proven. That is good, and that we should expand. And what we should definitely do in these Reallabore, real laboratories, for instance, for a future energy world on smartification of grids, we should then allow what we figured out, regulation technology-wise, to go into the market. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to put money in projects to do it for 5 years, say, hey, we found out something really wise, and say, okay, we don't go further because we don't have the courage to put it in actual regulation. And that is something we are working on right now.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, because one of the things that's very vexing about bureaucracy, as I mentioned, I don't think anyone gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to go be a bureaucrat today.
I still do, but okay.
Well, maybe they do. But really, I think it's a kind of problem that's all around us, and we're a part of it, and we don't even know we're a part of it. Like that person opposing our project in the town, okay? They don't get up in the morning thinking, I'm going to go destroy the German economy. Okay, but that's kind of what the net effect of what they're doing is. I think it's much better to focus on something positive and make it happen. So for example, last December, I was in San Francisco and I was riding around in driverless vehicles. Some of you in the audience have probably been in, right? Okay, is Germany the automotive leader of the world? Then why don't we have autonomous vehicles in Berlin? And so next year, when we come to the Berlin Global Dialogue, let's have that option and say, we got 12 months to make it happen. We need things like that, where it's not about a million reasons why it can't happen, but one thing, and it's gonna happen.
Well, I think the Global Dialogue has its work cut out for it over that next year. So Desiree, thank you very much for that question. That really sparked a fantastic debate here. And I want to take a look around the room, whether there is any question from the audience. Oh, here, please. Hang on, just wait for a microphone. And please also say who you are and who you're addressing your question to.
Hello, I'm Marjorie Chorlins. I represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce based in Washington, D.C. I am here this week not only to attend this global dialogue, but also to make the case to various member state officials that further improvements in CS3D are indeed necessary. Bill, it's nice to see you again. I guess my question is sort of twofold. There's clearly a political commitment at the top of the Commission and at the top of member state governments to reduce bureaucracy. And that's why this simplification process has the momentum it does. But we don't necessarily see that same enthusiasm, if you will, at the working levels. So my question is, how do you affect change in the mindset at the working levels? And then, as an adjunct, how do we ensure that we don't stay on the path we're on, which is to say, when new regulations are introduced, we run into exactly the same challenges, which is that real-world commercial considerations haven't necessarily been factored into the mix. Thank you.
Who's that question to? The Commission? Yes, okay.
Yes, I think that's a very valid question. We do have our simplification agenda, and it requires our constant attention. But indeed, it cannot be just kind of imposed top-down process. That's why in parallel we are working to change also regulatory culture in European Commission, how we are dealing with this, how we are putting forward new legislation, making sure that we are ready from the beginning, internalize all those issues, that we are serious about competitiveness check of our proposals, SME test, that we have the implementation in mind already when we are designing our rules and regulations, that we also think already at that stage how they are going to be practically implemented, what challenges they may arise, and that we engage with stakeholders, both now looking at the stock of legislation. So that's why we have those implementation dialogues with industry, with various stakeholders to discuss our existing stock. But we do the same also going forward when designing new rules and regulations. So I fully agree. It cannot be just top-down political campaign, because then it just will fade out at some moment. But it also requires a change in regulatory culture and working methods within the European Commission, and we are also working on it.
There's a question there. Yeah.
Does it work? Max Horster, Spencer Stewart, and also here with YPO. I have a question to Commissioner Dombrovskis. The omnibus was, of course, introduced as a reaction to a shared feeling that there is maybe too much regulation and it's not coordinated enough, right? And then the pause button was pressed and the omnibus came out. Now the reaction on the other side of the Atlantic was to take out chainsaws, right, to debureaucratize. So I wondered, is the omnibus something that we should think of as the European answer to the chainsaw and the proof that that the European Union is able to roll back bureaucracy? Is that the litmus test that we should observe for the months to come?
Yeah. No, this for once is not the case. Certainly it's not our response to the chainsaws, and we have been very clear from the very beginning. When we talk about simplification, we are not talking about deregulation, so we are not abolishing our high social and environmental standards. And we rather see how we reach our policy goals in a simpler and less costly way. Because often also regulations are there for a reason. If we think, for example, in financial sector, much of the regulations were introduced as a response to global financial economical crisis, and we see that by and large this set of kind of regulatory and supervisory rules in the financial sector serves us well. Over the last economic crisis, financial sector was not part of the problem, was part of the solution. So we are not now saying now we are taking out a chainsaw and deregulating again and then facing another financial crisis some years down the road, but really working on targeted changes where we need to eliminate some overlaps, inconsistencies, unnecessary requirements. So it's much more the targeted approach which we are pursuing.
Another question here.
Christian Lloyd's professor at the University of Chicago. So my question is probably for the Commissioner and the Minister, but also be curious in whether Bill Anderson would support the idea. So there's a very simple solution potentially to simplification in the EU, and that's the idea of the 28th regime. So the idea would be, for people who are not familiar with it, would be that the EU comes out with a simple EU regime, and instead of working it through all the way to the countries, it would simply just make that regime, companies can adopt that regime, operate under it, and importantly, the 28th regime would prevent and preempt any other regulation by the other countries that you don't have to comply with multiple rounds. It seems to me that that would be much faster, better than the directive approach that we've been following for decades that has been incredibly slow and led to the gold plating that we've seen.
Yeah, on this 28th regime, indeed, we are currently in European Commission working on this, so it's in next year's European Commission work program, and that's in a sense an initiative how we can allow companies to scale up in Europe. So to use a full scale of European single market, because now all too often we see we quasi have our single market, but companies anyway go to scale up somewhere to US or Asia, because de facto companies then are still confronted with 27 national rules and regulations. So that's exactly the idea of this 28th regime, to allow companies to scale up across the entire single market, and I hope we'll be able to put forward ambitious proposal on this already next year.
Mr. Reiche?
That is an interesting principle, especially when it comes to scaling up industrial processes, AI and others. There's another concept, Wolfgang Schäuble once called this Europe of different velocities. So why not having a couple of fast-moving members to invest or to try something and then allow the others to follow? That could be also a concept, for instance, when it comes to spending on defense. To be honest, I'm not very sure if a parallel framework for investments in defense from EU and NATO is the best case. But having the deployment, for instance, from Baltics, from Germany with other allies, to go in for technology, invest, and then open it to the rest of the member state could be also something. There's an interesting finding on DevTech. 80% of the international venture capital is deployed to German DevTech companies, DevTech startups. So we are much more successful in gaining capital for German defense startups than the US, which is an interesting finding. And we should now really use this opportunity to invite others to invest.
Bill, did you want to comment on that as well?
I would just put in that I think this example of a reform proposal is an example of the kind of things that will be necessary. Something has to be done because I think the people representing the countries at the Commission, in the national leadership regimes, they really do have a difficult task. I mean, it's easy to blame them, but when you have, kind of the town having a say, the state having a say, the nation having a say, and then Europe, EU having a say, it's kind of like when we say, well, we want to take out bureaucracy. Well, at which level? And we have a lot of this kind of overlap where you have the EU law, but then you also have a German law, and you've got to comply with both, and they're different. And I at some point, yeah, something's got to be done because it's a system that makes, I would say, excellent political leaders look bad. We've got to reform it.
And Minister Reiche, because I know I have to let you go because you have a very urgent commitment that you signaled to me, that's why you have to leave early. But I just want to do justice to the magnitude of actually the historical situation that the European Union is in, particularly in the face of AI. The message companies are getting in the United States is that basically all restrictions are off. There are no limits. The key concern is getting enough energy. All energy companies can get contracts in the US easily at this moment in time. So do you feel that there is enough of a sense of the magnitude of this moment that will be so decisive in whether the EU actually can become a player in this new technology?
I can't speak for others, I can speak for myself. To have computational power, computational investments and data center capacity is of utmost importance. We have a lot of requests of projects and we can't get them to the grid. And if we can get them to the grid, then there's a question, is there enough energy when it comes to the reduction of base load? So we have to do two things. First, to secure our base load. It's good to have a lot of renewables, but first of all, you have to have a security of supply and base load, and that is something also the United States is struggling with. There's a lot of gas projects, so SMRs are far away. Coal isn't suitable, and also not for our CO2 side. So we need probably for foreseeable time base load with gas connections to the grid. For that, we have to change regulation. Right now, the regulation is like this, that it doesn't matter if you're a large project or a smaller one. If you're a data center, a hospital, or a small PV park, or airport, you have to stand in line. And the grid operator has to go position by position and prove every project, even if there isn't a real approach for real investment behind this. For instance, we have 520 gigawatts requests on batteries. 520 gigawatts for Germany, that's just ridiculous. A lot of those requests are just tries. They are not a really business case behind this, but the grid operator has to prove everything. So what we discuss right now with our grid regulator is how to change rule to connect the data center to the grids. There's not a lack of willingness. There's not a lack of money. We have also space for this. For instance, in the Frankfurt area, a lot of sites were reshaped from, unfortunately, former industries into possible data center areas, but we can't connect them to the transmission or to the distribution grid. And here we have to really move forward. If we don't have the investments in data center capacity, we will really lose the battle. As I said, 1/3 of the US GDP growth right now just comes from computational investments and computational power. And we have to invest without data centers, no AI, and with no AI, the distance between us and the United States will be as big that we have difficulties to cope with.
On that sober assessment, thank you very much. Katherina Reiche, German Trade Minister, will have to let you go. This is your applause. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brussels.
And I have one more question here in the audience. I'm sorry, then we missed that opportunity this time around. Is there anyone else right now? No. Then Commissioner.
Oh, there's one here.
There we go. Yes.
Hello, thank you. My name is Andreas Lang. I am a director with Strategy End, which is the strategy arm of the PwC network. So my question is to the Commissioner with regards to changing the mindset. We see regulation often as an obstacle for speed, for innovation, for investments. If you change the perspective, from my perspective, it can also be perceived as an asset. We in the European Union, we have maybe a slower approach. You mentioned AI, for example, where we're not that fast, where we're not that risk-taking, but we might do it in a right way, that it serves us as a civilization, as the European Union, as the population. So what is your approach on seeing that as well? What is your strategy with regards to using regulation, given the session is called smart regulation, using it as an asset and not always seeing it as an obstacle?
As often, the question will be about finding the right balance. And indeed, one can say the social contract in Europe is different than in US or Asia or elsewhere. And by and large, our social market economy is serving us well. And so, as I was already responding to some previous questions, our intention is now not to change it or not to start slashing it. I think it's a question how we find this right balance. And right now we just have to admit that probably we had indeed overdone with some of those rules and regulations, also just assessing the cumulative impact of them and interplay between different pieces of legislation. So now it is the right time to take stock where we are and to simplify where necessary. But also, as I had been outlining before, our intention is not to move away from our high social and environmental standards. We believe those are important, but question how we achieve our policy goals in a simpler and less costly way. Because we are talking also a lot about the need to innovate, the need to move forward, need to decarbonize. Sometimes using this example, you do not decarbonize by producing endless reports. You do decarbonize by innovating and investing. So that's the approach we need to facilitate.
Commissioner, you're also on the record of advocating that smart regulation doesn't necessarily mean less. I'm still to meet someone who doesn't feel that it must mean less. And I just want to get to the heart of the challenge you face as commissioner, because you're responsible to 27 countries, in getting the sense of urgency. Are you secretly praying for a kind of shocking event that could kick EU countries into action, as it has done on the European defense industry to some degree?
Well, first of all, on this question whether smart regulation has to mean less. Well, actually, it has to mean less, and actually we have even set numerical targets how much less. 25% less for all companies in terms of administrative burdens and 35% for SMEs, and it's estimated that it means something like 37.5 billion euros less in recurring annual administrative costs, which we want to achieve by the end of this mandate. And our proposals so far have generated 8.6 billion savings. What I am saying is that we need to be precise and targeted in our approach. To use this chainsaw analogy, we should not be running chaotically with a chainsaw and cutting left, right, and center, but we need to be precise in what we are doing, and I think that's what this smart regulation is about.
What's your translation of smart?
Yeah, and I just have to say, I mean, I appreciate the question, but I think we have to give up that notion that somehow we can regulate our way to success. And I think Commissioner Dombrovskis, you gave some excellent examples. And what's interesting about them are, like, for example, the standard plug for cars. These are things where that's actually pretty simple regulation. In other words, you just say, yep, we're going to have one plug. Those are brilliant examples. That, as you said, it's the overdoing it. That, you know, I don't know, what was that? Last week or the week before, we had this fascinating debate about whether a vegetarian sausage can be called a sausage, and you know, stuff like that. We just don't need that stuff. Do you know? Those are kind of the funny examples that make it into the newspaper. But for everyone like that makes it into the newspaper, there's 100 that are just silently destroying jobs and stopping progress. And like the project that I mentioned in the town, right? This is just, it's just too easy with a mentality like this. And so I do think that the rhetoric needs to turn to say, hey, we need to have great jobs for Europe, and we're going to make sure that we clear out the clutter that prevents creation of new jobs and innovation in Europe. And I think we have to get past this notion of, you know, sort of regulatory innovation. It's important to have good regulation, but it's got to be limited to the essentials and not try to, you know, regulate your way to success. It's never going to happen.
Commissioner, speaking to people off the record, there is a clear sense also in the Commission that it cannot move fast enough. It's just not fast enough to meet the challenge, particularly from China and the US, who are signaling to their companies, particularly on AI, there won't be any regulation in your way at all. So what is the message that you have when you speak to member countries about this?
I still would reiterate this point that we are not now trying to enter some kind of a race of deregulation or a race to the bottom. So our approach is really that it's less regulation by all means has to mean better, as we're having those more fundamental questions that the social contract in Europe is just different as US or Asia, China or elsewhere. So we cannot copy-paste that approach. So we have to improve our own approach. So therefore we cannot be in this race, but we have to admit that yes, we have problems, we have slower productivity growth, we need to assess what factors are affecting this and addressing those factors fairly quickly. And that's exactly what we are doing with our broader competitiveness compass strategy, where we are dealing with a broad set of issues, because here we are focusing very much on this simplification and administrative burden, which is an important part of the work, but that's by no means the only thing which is affecting Europe's competitiveness. So it's actually much broader work, and we need to move fast on all of those initiatives and measures we are taking to improve competitiveness. And indeed, it's important that, should say, everyone is on board with this. And if we look at the political spectrum, there is still some debate, and I hope that discussions like this, but not only this, help to instill this sense of urgency, so that it gets even broader acceptance that yes, we do have issues to deal with, and we need to move fast.
What exemptions, what kind of sandboxes would you envision could be built for highly critical industries? For instance, on the whole AI debate, what often gets lost in the debate is that everything that relates to the huge data lakes and consumers, that's where the big tech companies are way ahead. But when it comes to industrial AI agents within companies, that is more, that yields less fast profits. There, European companies are actually holding their own. So could you imagine any kind of exemptions being created for them?
You mentioned those sandboxes, and Minister was talking about them. Regulatory sandboxes as instrument exist in the EU. They can be used. So the question is, indeed, what the Minister raised, I think, is the right question, whether something which emerges from those regulatory sandboxes and which we see as a useful innovation, how we allow it to develop further before it hits maybe more complex rules where it doesn't exactly fit into those more complex rules. We'll be looking obviously also at all those issues now when looking at the implementation of AI Act. We are right now exactly in the process of developing different guidances and elements, and there we need to see indeed how we can simplify, how we can make sure that it does not become impeding for investment, and where maybe we need to amend this. This is also part of our agenda.
I want to close by asking both of you which marker you have in mind where you feel it will become apparent whether EU states can develop the will to really transition towards more competitive, more smart regulation. You first, Bill.
I think we have some concrete opportunities that we face right now. I mentioned one about autonomous vehicles. To me, that's a no-brainer for Germany.
You want to see those next year?
I'm saying because it's a positive. It's a positive example. It's almost impossible to defeat bureaucracy in a sort of defensive war. You have to have offense. You have to be able to kind of drive through it, and so
literally.
Yeah. Well, in this case, but for example, rare earths. Maybe that's another example. You know, maybe it's finding the 10 things that we'd say, hey, these are essential areas where Europe has to be competitive, and essentially these are, whether you call it the sandboxes, but these are areas where no stone is left unturned, and we are going to succeed in these areas on behalf of the people of Europe, the jobs in Europe, and the future. I think that's the opportunity space, because you can get people behind that. Trying to fight against this phantom foe of bureaucracy is really challenging.
On rare earths, the US, of course, just signed a big deal with Australia, and also guaranteeing that they will buy certain amounts and guaranteeing prices. That's something the German government isn't doing and the European Union isn't doing at this moment in time. But what is your personal marker?
Yeah, maybe to come in on this rare earths. Indeed, that's a very topical issue right now when China has substantially expanded its export controls on rare earths, both in terms of elements covered and in terms of actually covering entire value chain and quite far-reaching extraterritorial provisions. Obviously, we need to find solutions in short term, and we are in engagement with Chinese authorities. We are looking, in a sense, what our possible measures from our side is. We are coordinating this also with US, with G7 partners, and so. But at the end of the day, really the answer will come through diversification. You can only ensure resilience of supplies through diversification. And there we are following the similar approach. We have raw materials partnerships with already a number of countries. We probably need to be now more concrete and develop projects faster, where our approach is exactly this, to enter into partnerships with minerals-rich countries and to build on mutually beneficial approach, where we get access to critical minerals we need, but where we come with our technologies, our investments, and help those countries also to get more value added from their minerals, not only extracting but also processing, so that those countries also see benefit from this. And what we see right now is obviously signals that we need to accelerate this work, and US is working in the same direction. For your second question on markers for bureaucracy and so, I would not be putting some kind of artificial markers or something. What I think is important is that we are in discussion with industry, in discussion with relevant stakeholders, listen what they have to say, and actually then follow through.
On this very concrete takeaway, I want to thank both of you, Commissioner Dombrovskis and Bill Anderson. As always, thanks so much for your analysis. Thanks to you as an audience. It's been a fantastic audience with great questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michaela.
And just a service announcement, we'll continue at 3:15 here in the room with a debate on EU security.